Hey everybody, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at 3 of the most common tools in Photoshop. We're going to look at the Move tool, the Crop tool, and the Zoom tool, and how they can help you out in your projects. Starting off, let's take a look at the Move tool, which you would think would be a very simple tool, but there are a few things that you may not know about the Move tool that could help you out in your projects. Now, to access the Move tool, you can grab it on the left-hand side of your workspace in the Tools bar, or you can use the shortcut key V. And it does exactly what it states. It gives you the ability to move different elements around your document and place them wherever you please. Now, you can also use the Move tool to quickly select layers within your document and even align those layers using a variety of alignment and distribution options, which we're going to cover in this video. So as you can see in the Layers panel, this document is composed of several layers. And when a layer is highlighted, I can use my Move tool to drag the contents of that layer anywhere within the document. And I also have the ability to move several layers at once. Let's take the bottom 2 layers for example. With my Command key on the Mac or Control key on Windows held down, I can click on the unhighlighted layer to include that in my Move. You'll notice they're both highlighted now. Now, just like before, I can drag these layers anywhere I like. Now, if you don't want to go to your Layers panel all the time, there are 2 other ways you can select multiple layers. First, in the Options bar, you can turn on the Auto Select checkbox. With this turned on, a simple left click on the desired layer will select it. But what if you're like me and you don't want every click to select a layer? Well, there's a shortcut key for that. If you're on the Mac, hold down Command. If you're on Windows, hold down Control, and then click on your desired layer. And you'll notice that as I'm clicking on each layer, they're being selected in the Layers panel. But this is only one layer at a time. Now what if I wanted multiple layers? In that case, just include your Shift key along with the Command or Control key. So if I hold down Shift and Command and click on another layer, it becomes selected as well. Now sticking with shortcut keys, there's a few more to note when it comes to the Move tool. If you need to move your objects in small increments, you have the ability to use the arrow keys on your keyboard to move your object 1 pixel at a time. Now if that's not enough, hold down your Shift key to move it 10 pixels at a time. Also, if you keep holding down Shift while you're dragging a layer, it'll constrain it horizontally or vertically, depending on the direction that you're dragging it. And finally, if you hold down your Alt or Option key, Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and then drag your layer, it'll duplicate that layer and move it wherever you place it. Now you might have also noticed on our Options bar, there's another checkbox, Show Transform Controls, this box right here. If you're working on a project and you see a gray box surrounding your selected layer and you have no idea what it is or how to hide it, this option may be checked on. That gray box is your transform controls. With this selected, you're able to manipulate your layers in a few different fashions. First, if you move your cursor to any of the sides, including the corners, you can drag the handle in or out to resize that layer. And if you hold down your Alt or Option key while dragging one of the sides, it's going to resize the opposite side as well. Also, if I hold down my Shift key while dragging a corner, it's going to resize that object and keep the same aspect ratio as you resize. So if you have a perfect square or a perfect circle and you want to resize it but make sure it remains as a perfect square or a perfect circle, make sure to hold down your Shift key while you're resizing. Next, if you hold down your Command or Control key, Command on the Mac, Control on Windows, and drag in a corner, you can give your object some perspective. And finally, if you move your cursor just beyond any of the corners, you'll notice that it changes to allow you to rotate that object. And once you finish transforming your layer, either press the check mark at the top on the Options bar or return to accept the changes. Now the last thing the Move tool can do for you is alignment and distribution of multiple layers. When you have 2 or more layers selected, the alignment options become available. Just by looking at the icons, you might be able to get an idea of what each of them do. But if I hover my mouse over top of each of the icons, Photoshop is going to tell me exactly what they do. For example, if I wanted the 2 selected objects to line up with the top edge of the highest item, I'd press the first button. The second button will line up your objects based on their vertical center, and the third button will line them up on the bottom edge of the lowest object. It may take a little bit of time to understand exactly what these buttons do, but once you start playing around and experiment, it'll become a lot easier to understand. Now the next 3 buttons are usually used if your objects need to be aligned and stacked on top of each other. Left edges, center, and right edges. And finally, we have our distribution options. These buttons will help you evenly space your objects from one another. For example, if I wanted these three objects to have the same spacing between all of them, I can press the Distribute Horizontal Centers button and Photoshop will automatically space them correctly. If I now go ahead and align them, you can see the results more clearly. The next tool we're going to be discussing is cropping. Now, cropping in Photoshop CS6 has gotten some interesting changes, which some users like them, some users don't. The crop tool, just like the move tool, can be located on your tools bar on the left, or by pressing the letter C on your keyboard. When the tool is activated, you're going to see your crop handle surround the image. There are a few features to take note of with the crop tool. On the options bar at the top of the workspace, the first drop-down will give you a few options as to the aspect ratio of the crop. By default, your crop is set to width, height, resolution, which gives you a few different options. First, you're free to drag any of the crop handles to simply chop off an unwanted area of your photo. You're going to notice that when you drag your crop handles, the area of the image that will remain visible stays centered on your workspace. And just like on previous versions of Photoshop, the area that will be removed is slightly darkened. Now, if you find yourself having a hard time getting used to the auto-centered preview, you can turn it on or off under the gear icon on your options bar. This area also allows you to turn on classic mode, which mimics what you're used to in Photoshop CS5. The second use of this option is that you're able to enter the exact dimensions for your crop. As an example, if I wanted to end up with a 1280 by 720 pixel document, I can simply enter those values into the fields, and Photoshop will give me a constrained area, which I can resize, and then accept the crop by pressing the check mark or return on my keyboard. You also have the resolution field available to you as well. If you're working on a photo that you imported from your camera, it may be 250 or 300 pixels per inch, but if you want to very quickly reduce that to 72 pixels per inch, you can simply add the resolution to the third field on your options bar. Now, if you're running Photoshop CS6 and you're not a Creative Cloud member, some of these options may be a little bit different. The width height resolution option is called unconstrained on previous versions. Now, going back to our crop menu, another option available to you is ratio, which allows you to enter a specific ratio such as 4:3 or 16:9. However, many of the common aspect ratios are available in that drop-down menu, such as 4:5, 5:7, 2:3, and 16:9. Selecting any of these will resize the crop area to match that ratio, and as you resize, the ratio remains constrained. But of course, if you'd like to crop your image but keep the same ratio that it was shot at, you can select the original ratio option. This means that if the image was taken with a 4:6 aspect ratio, if you were to drag any of your handles inwards, the final crop will remain 4:6. This is very useful if you specifically shot an image at a specific ratio and you don't want to stray away from it. The crop tool also gives you the option to rotate your image if you choose. Moving your cursor just outside the crop area will activate the rotate tool. You're going to notice that the cursor changes into curved arrows. Holding down your mouse and dragging will rotate the image. This is one of the areas of the improved crop tool that some users find difficult to get used to. Instead of the crop area rotating like it did in Photoshop CS5, in CS6 the image rotates to give you a live preview of what your final result will look like. This may take some time getting used to, but once you do, the pros definitely outweigh the cons. At this point, if you're happy with the way the image is looking inside the crop area, you can either press the check mark on the options bar to apply the crop, or you can use the return or enter key on your keyboard. What's really nice about the new crop tool is that by default, Photoshop stores what you decided not to keep, just in case you change your mind later on. Going back to the crop tool, if you click on the crop area, you can adjust the crop if needed. So if you initially pulled the crop area in to get rid of a portion of the image, you can now pull it back out to restore your image. Now, the last area of the crop tool that I want to touch on is straighten. Many times I found myself taking a picture of a horizon, only to realize that the image is on an angle. So instead of rotating the image and guessing if I corrected the mistake, I can now click on the straighten button on the options bar and then draw a line across my horizon. Photoshop will use that line to correct the image. The last tool in this video I want to go over is the zoom tool, another very simple but necessary tool in Photoshop. You can access the zoom tool in a few different ways. You can choose the magnify glass on the left side on your tools bar, the Z key on your keyboard, or a variety of shortcuts. If you like traditional ways of operating Photoshop, once you have the zoom tool selected on the options bar, you can choose to either zoom in or out. You can also click and drag your mouse to perform the same action. The 100% button, which on previous versions is actual pixels, will zoom the document to its exact size. If it's 1000 by 1000 pixels, it will appear that size on your screen. The Fit Screen button will force the document to extend to the edges of your canvas, but at the same time making sure to display the whole document. And Fill Screen, on the other hand, will fill your whole canvas regardless if the whole document is displayed. But of course there are shortcut keys. If you already have your zoom tool active, to zoom in the opposite direction, hold down your Alt or Options key. You're going to notice the cursor changes to the other direction. Now if you're not on your zoom tool, but let's say the Move tool, you can still zoom. Holding down your spacebar and then Command on the Mac, Control on Windows will activate the Zoom In function. Now, while holding down the spacebar with Alt or Option, Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, will activate the Zoom Out function. This shortcut key is super handy if you don't want to keep switching back to the zoom tool every time you want to use it. You can also use Command or Control plus or minus to zoom in or out in smaller increments. And that's an overview of the Move, Crop, and Zoom tool in Photoshop. You're going to find yourself using these tools on almost every project you're working on, so it's good to know exactly how they work. In the next video, we're going to take a look at another tool you're going to be using quite often, the Brush tool. We'll see you soon.